I had some things I was thinking about today, just on the way up. Thought we'd go over. We good? Mm-hmm. There's a number of verses in the Gita that speak about being detached. And usually it's the form of you should be near dvandva. Dvandva means, dvi in Sanskrit means two. It's where you get the word dual from, or duo from, or probably dos. In Spanish also comes from. Dvi, two. Dvandva means two-ness. Or if you want to translate it more appropriately into English, you'd say duality. Near dvandva means without duality. Near means without. Like nirvana is a negative way of describing liberation. It's to extinguish yourself. To go out. To extinguish yourself. So near dvandva means without duality. And sometimes you get pairs of things you should be detached from. Sukha and dukkha, happiness and distress. Shita, ushna, heat and cold. Pleasure and pain. Glorification and infamy, etc., etc. So it's a staple, really, of Eastern spirituality in general, and some forms of Western spirituality, but definitely all forms of Eastern spirituality, that you should be detached from material things, the ups and downs of the roller coaster of life. You find a little bit of not a little bit, you find this sense in the marriage vows that people take. For better or for worse, in richness and in poorness, happiness, stress, sickness and in health, forever and ever, till death do us part. And so this idea that there's your commitment or your conviction should not be fair weather or shallow or temporary. You even find this in the standard Western marriage vows. Like you go to Vegas to get married, you do a drive-through wedding, and the priest is reading from a script. This is probably the script. So you should be free from duality. And obviously there's tremendous value in this. Without a little bit of detachment, you're materialistic. Being materialistic is the opposite of being spiritual. These things are inversely proportional. And so to be a spiritualist, almost by definition, means to be at least a bit aloof from the comings and goings of this world, which are so A, out of your control, and B, ultimately petty in comparison to the important things in life. If you were going to die tomorrow, what would you do with your last day? Would you spend it arguing with people that you don't even know on the internet about trivial pursuits like your life depended on it? Would you be upset at people for cutting you off on the road? Would you be holding on to your petty grievances for the way people treated you in high school, or the way your brother treated you, or the way your parents treated you? Would you do that? Sometimes it's sad, it's pathetic, like when you see old women trying to look like they're 22 or something like that. Also, it's pathetic when you see old people in general holding on to bitterness from when they were little kids. And blaming their parents, who are dead gone, and their grandparents, but they're still blaming all the mistakes in life. on what their parents do. You think that's only like 20-year-olds or 25-year-olds who do that, but you live long enough, you start to get to know older people, and you find they have the same rap. Blaming the way they are on what their parents did, how they were raised them. At some point, we actually set a date by the age of 18. You take responsibility for what you do, and you can't hold your parents accountable anymore, and you don't get a free pass. If you do something particularly egregious, they try as an adult, even if you're 16 or 17, if they determine that your crime was heinous enough, you deserve to be tried as an adult. Kat, you can hear me, right? You guys following this? If it was your last day, you wouldn't spend your time blaming people, griping. What would you do? That may be a little different for each person, but for certain it wouldn't be that. And if it was that you would want to gripe at people with your last dying breath, that's really sad. There's that classic folk tale. I've heard it in Indian folk tale, I'm sure. Other cultures have it too, about the frog and the scorpion. Scorpion needed to cross the river, could swim, the frog and swim. So the scorpion said, give me a ride on your back. Frog said, there's no way I'm giving you a ride on my back, you're going to bite me. The scorpion said, why would I bite you? If I bite you, you're going to sink and I'm going to drown. So the frog thought it through and said, yeah, that makes sense. It's mutually assured destruction. That's what the Cold War ran on with our nuclear proliferation, arming ourselves to tease and destroy the world dozens of times over, and then pointing our missiles at each other. And it was mutually assured destruction, which is like the lowest form of diplomacy. And so they set out on that little journey across the river, and halfway across the river, the scorpion bit the frog. The frog was sinking. He looked back and said, why did you bite me? You're going to die. And the scorpion said, I know. It's just like, it's my nature. Couldn't help. So maybe there are people like that. They're going to gripe, complain to their last. It's just their thing. They can't get over it. Certainly such a state of affairs would be sad. We value this detachment. How do you know? Because when push comes to shove, on your last day of your life, we don't want to be attached and petty. Do you follow? The proof that we value it on some level is we don't want to walk out super attached, holding on to our last breath. When we make important commitments, the commitments are, we throw in standard things that break commitments, and we say, you can't break your commitment for this. Sickness in the health, rich and poor, etc., etc. Some people take their marriage vows so seriously, it survives infidelity. Marriage essentially is a sexual contract between two people. In most states, if you don't give sex to your spouse, that's grounds for divorce. At least it used to be, and I'm pretty sure they haven't updated the legalities of it. You can cite that as a reason for divorces. A lot of states have updated things to be irreconcilable differences, to just sort of give you like a catch-all phrase that you can use without me getting into it further. But a lot of times you'll find, I don't know what it's like, non-compliant with spousal privileges. They have some language for it, some sort of euphemistic language for not giving it up. And that becomes grounds for divorce, at least it used to be. And I'm almost certain it still is, at least in a lot of states. But even though marriage is largely a sexual contract with tax benefits, some marriages, even though that's the basis of it, People take it so seriously, even infidelity doesn't kill. It's not just because those people are weak and this or that. Sometimes it's because they really value the commitment they make. Anyway, we find that even if in the East, the idea of being free from duality is plainly stated, very regularly, straightforwardly, freedom from duality, lust and greed, and fear and anger, heat and cold, pleasure and pain, happiness, stress, wealth and poverty, fame and infamy, etc., etc. Even though that's really standard and straightforward in the East and not so much in the West, if you dig a little bit into Western soil, you'll find in marriage vows, in the way people think about life and death and leaving this world, in our values, you find this freedom from duality is still alive and well, even in Western culture. Did you follow that? Did you follow what I said? Why not? I was extremely clear. I've spent so much time going over this way longer than I should have to. I'm teaching like you're 10 years old. Why didn't you follow?
I think so.
Okay, that's probably not a good idea.
Yeah.
Did you follow what I said? I'm explaining myself 5, 6, 7 times in a row so you guys will get it. Pay attention. I actually know what I'm talking about. I don't need to preach to myself. This is for you. You've risked COVID-19 to be here. You might as well listen up. How did I know you were spacing out?
I don't know.
That's how it works. I got some kind of spidey sense. Okay. You follow? Let me say it again. In Eastern culture, freedom from duality is regularly, straightforwardly, cleanly stated. People understand it. They understand exactly what it means. And although that might seem like an exotic or foreign concept, which is more standard in Buddhism or Hinduism and not in Western philosophy and Western spirituality, if you dig a little bit, even into Western culture generally speaking, you will find that freedom from duality is there. It's just not quite as straightforwardly explicated. But it's still there right on the surface in our marriage vows, in the way we think about the way we want to leave the world, in our value system. You just have to think about it a little tiny bit more carefully to find those same values articulated or assumed and implicitly woven into our culture. Did you follow it that time? Did you follow it that time?
I was paying attention, but I didn't understand what you're saying.
Okay. I'm going to say it one more time. In the East, freedom from duality is straightforwardly put forward as a value that people should cultivate. Anybody who's even familiar and passing with Eastern spirituality will know this. Right? At a glance, Western culture does not have this exact same value system as cleanly articulated in simple words like being near dvandva, which translate to free from duality. We don't have terms like that in English. That's the proof that it's not quite such a straightforward part of our culture, because we don't have a single word which encapsulates it. Despite that, if you scratch and dig a little bit into the culture you were raised with, if you were raised in the West, you will find in marriage vows, in the way people think about death and leaving this world, and what people ultimately value when push comes to shove, and people's morality, that maybe we don't expect, that we have implicit within us, and that we've learned from TV shows like Star Wars, or whatever. You will find stoicism and freedom from duality there, all pervasively, implicitly, in our value system. And therefore, the concept of being free from duality is not as exotic as it might seem at first glance. Did you get it that time?
I guess I don't understand what are some examples in the East that show I guess I don't understand freedom from duality, what that means.
Do you remember when I said that being the same in heat and cold, pleasure and pain, victory and defeat, happiness and distress?
Mm-hmm.
That's what it means.
Okay.
I spent a good 5 or 8 minutes at the beginning of class explaining what the concept meant. Were you spacing out for that as well?
No, I heard that, but I couldn't connect the dots. Sorry.
Okay. Can you connect them now?
Yeah.
I appreciate you being brave and asking a question. If I'm not going to get on your case for how you could have possibly missed that,
Okay.
like the fact that you voiced your confusion and gave me an opportunity to clear it up, we're good.
Okay. It clicked now. So thank you.
That's why we're doing this. Looking for. Is there anybody else who this didn't click 4 or 5 minutes? Did this click for? Just raise your hand if this clicked for you 5 or 8 minutes ago. This didn't click for you 5 or 8 minutes ago? Huh? You just gave a quick raise, like raise and then put it down? It clicked for everybody else a while ago, right? This is you guys sometimes. The same way I have to explain it for her over and over again. It's been all of you at various points. I can hear when I do a good job of explaining something. When I don't, I repeat myself. When I finally get to a place where I think everybody has to have understood this, I then move on. And sometimes somebody misses it. As long as it's not because you spaced out, we're good. We all on the same page now? All right. So, in the Gita, you will find dozens and dozens of statements like instructing, practically speaking, that we should be free from duality. There's probably 40 statements in the Gita. Out of 700 verses, probably 40 of them contain these recommendations of being free from duality. They come up over and over and over again throughout the texts. It's an all-pervasive feature of it. Here's one instance. Anabhishvanga, pucha, dara, grihadishu. One should be free from attachment to son, wife, house, etc. You should be free from attachment to son, wife, putra means son, dara means wife, griha means house, like a grihasta, somebody who's married. They're situated in the house. Griha, adishu, etc. We should be free from attachment to son, wife, house, etc. This would be an instance of this idea of being free from duality. Now when I read this, something immediately comes to mind. What is that immediately comes to mind? Can anybody guess? What do we need to troubleshoot right out the gate with a quatrain like this? It's a quarter of a verse. It's a quatrain. So what needs to be troubleshot? Moderate. How's anybody supposed to have a family? Yes, that is something that needs to be troubleshot. For me, there's something even more immediate. What do you guys think? Anybody? I find there's something offensive in this verse. Anybody guess what it is? Yeah.
Does that mean that you don't care about your family?
That's along the lines of what she said. It sure looks very good. For me, there's something which is more immediate that needs to be tackled in 2020. Yeah.
How to provide for the family?
Yeah, I mean, it's all the same thing. How do you get married? That's what she said. How do you then provide for your family or get married or care about people and not become an automaton? You guys are all in the same universe. If you have an answer which is remotely resembling that, don't raise your hand. Because I've already said that's not what I'm looking for. So therefore, if you give me another version of it, I'm sharp enough to recognize it's in the same family, even if you're not. So just be worried that you're going to hear the frustration in my voice if you say something which is remotely in the same family of those answers. And just don't say it. I find something offensive about this verse that needs to be troubleshot immediately. That's not remotely resembling what anybody has said thus far. Hari Bhakta. Did you raise your hand? Smart man. Okay. I was good until you spaced out. And then you just kind of turned that little teacher, like that little teacher dial. That little college, like that little grade school teacher dial. Go ahead.
Why does it say son and wife?
There you go. I mean, obviously. Don't you guys, I mean, is anybody was anybody like alive after the civil rights movement? I mean, come on. You're like a gay man. How could you not know this?
I had the thought, but I didn't want to immediately go there.
You're a traitor. Obviously, the verse uses what will be called patriarchal language. It speaks to a man about his attachment to his son and his wife. Obviously, that needs to be troubleshot on the front end. What kind of woke person are you living up in Silver Lake and you don't know this?
Me?
Yeah, you
I knew it. I when he's read it, I was like, oh, so the daughters, etc. But that was in my head.
So the daughter's like an etc. She's not doesn't even get her own name.
Yeah.
She's an afterthought, a detail, right? So this has to be troubleshot. Because otherwise the Gita would appear to be using sexist language. Normally we would have a robust discussion. You guys would have a chance to slay this dragon of doubt. But we wasted all of our time going over the intro ad nauseum, at least to my taste. And so we got to move fast through this. Does anybody think they can just nail this one and just crush it and just like remove all doubt effortlessly? You can't. But I'm glad you got confidence. You want to go? Really? All right, you're up first, and then you're number 2.
The Gita was written at a certain time.
All right, so your argument is it's an old text, and in the old text, patriarchal language is okay. Yeah, great. The Gita was also written at a time when slavery existed in the Western world. Does that mean we should forgive slavery in our scripture text? Oh, dude, you just got crushed. Now you look like an idiot. Now you're on the back foot. I'm 90% won the debate. You're on the ground. You got a standing 8 count, but you're half knocked out and concussed. Where are you going to go now?
Did you say forgive slavery? Was that the verb you used? I just want to make sure.
Sure. Yes. I mean, I don't even know, but I don't think it matters. I don't think that's going to get you out of
Well,
trouble.
it doesn't say
if
that.
that's you're right. It doesn't say slavery. However, the defense that you just gave, if that defense was given for slavery, it's the same type of defense. There's something inappropriate in this old text, but it was written a long time ago, and at that time it was okay. Therefore, it's forgivable. Great. Slavery, wife beating, genital mutilation, and all sorts of human trafficking, all sorts of other stuff was acceptable at various points in history. Does that mean that it's not a major fatal flaw when you find those things in a thinker's writing? Okay, and now you just got KO'd. So you got KO'd. You could have just stayed down, taken your shot, but you got up again, and then you got KO'd again, and now you got brain damage. And you still lost the fight. What do you got, big man?
I mean, I just don't know if Arjuna has a daughter, but I'm just going to go with.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know. See, it was worth a shot, you know?
Ah! That's very smart. Well done. You get credit for that. Even if it fails, you get credit for that. He's talking to an individual, and therefore if he's speaking in that language to that individual, then that should be extended for anybody who he talks to, and it's not a fault because he's specifying his instruction for that person, right? Excellent. Well done. Right way to stay nimble on your feet. Good job. As much as I'm disappointed in both your attempts, I'm impressed with yours. If you get a good answer in, you guys get credit. I'm a happy camper. Oh, you guys like in a straight line. This is like a whole thing. But given that we're moving from terrible answer to really good answer, and like, for all I know, you might be crushing it. Let's see what you got. And I don't know you, so no matter what you say, I'm going to give you love. But do me a favor and yell at me. The first answer was, at that time, it was acceptable. The second answer was, hey, he's talking to Arjuna, who's a particular individual, and therefore he might not have had a daughter, definitely didn't have a husband, and therefore it's not a fault. And yours?
He's not arguing for these things, he's arguing to be free of these things.
Yes, but he's arguing to a man to be freed from attachment to his wife, and therefore, wouldn't it make sense to say you should be freed from your spouse? To use some type of a more gender-neutral language, which would be more inclusive, where it doesn't just end up being an instruction for men about giving up their wives and sons, but it becomes an instruction for women to be detached from their husbands as well. And so although he is saying to be freed from these things, he's speaking specifically to a guy in a language which makes it seem like transcendence is a male endeavor and is not actually meant for the women folk. And therefore it carries with it this sort of patriarchal language. Did you follow that critique?
I would divert to his answer then.
And that's fine. You didn't understand my critique. I assumed everybody got what I meant when I said patriarchal language. You didn't follow it, but now I explained it, and now you get it, right? Okay, so in my church I wouldn't do this, but it's a little more laissez-faire here, and so I get to wax on about my thoughts about gendered language, civil rights, gender-neutral pronouns, all manner of things. And so I'm just going to go ahead and this isn't necessarily like the Hare Krishna movement's position on this. This is my position on this. I don't think my church has a position on this, but I have a position on this, and I'm going to share it with you guys now. And you can feel free to disagree with me. In fact, I'd really enjoy that. And we could have a robust discussion, and for sure I'm interested in other points of view besides my own. And I subject my own thought to the same scrutiny I subject other people's to. So I doubt you're going to find anything too rough and tumble and unreasonable in what I have to say. Although it might be a little unpopular. Why don't I start off with some unpopular stuff? Sex, male and female, is based on biology. That's why you find it all over the animal kingdom. You find divisions of labor all over the animal kingdom. You find differences in the way men and women learn. Specifically, women always do better at language. Men always do better at math. That doesn't mean every man is a better mathematician than every woman, but it does mean when you make a large meta-study or meta-analysis, anywhere in the world, first, second, third world, you find that men do better at math and women do better at language. In fact, it's so bothered the people of Norway that they tried to get women to become engineers and men to become nurses for 40 years, and they failed. And they had rigorous civil rights in place. I mean, Norway is like, you can like marry a dolphin in Norway. I mean, it's like anything goes in that country. They're so progressive. They make us look like the antebellum South or something like that. It still couldn't change it. And they figured out why. Because from the day they're born, men look at machines, one-day-old babies, and one-day-old female babies look at faces. By the time they're 6 months old, they're playing with cars or they're playing with dolls. You can even trace it back to the amniotic fluid and how much testosterone that baby has. The more testosterone, the less you're able to recognize facial expressions, the less bedside manner you have. The less testosterone you have, the better you are at it. Proving that there are, in addition to just straightforward physical differences between men and women, they're undeniable, given that so much of our makeup is also in our brain, and our brain is such a repository of luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormones that cause your testes to make testosterone. These things come from your brain, as well as another hormones that just directly come from the brain. Surprise, surprise, in addition to the major differences we find physically between men and women, guess what, folks? There's mental differences as well. If you want to find a reason for men and women to be treated equally, don't make it based on the idea that we're physically the same or that we're mentally the same, because we're neither. Find a deeper reason for saying that everybody's the same and deserves equal rights. Given that we find sex in biology, what's the problem with using sexed language? He and she, his and her. You follow? Does that make sense? Well, we'll say that gender is a social construct and gender is different than sex. And so gender is norms are established by given societies and they differ from place to place. That's a standard rebuttal. They'll try to separate gender from sex. You follow? Do you understand the argument? I'm assuming you guys are familiar a little bit with gender politics and feminism 101. If you're not, Google it, but I'm just making reference to kind of a standard argument, a rebuttal of my position. Thing is, although you can say gender has social aspects to it, cultural aspects to it, what's it ultimately rooted in? Chromosomes, just like in biology. And so although there might be some cultural ideas about what women should do and what men should do and so on and so forth, that doesn't change the reality that gender has an absolute biological basis, way more than race. It's about as biological as you can get. And so to try to sever gender from sex is ridiculous. Now you could say, well, you should be able to choose what you identify as. Really? How about that white girl who said she was black up in Washington a few years ago? Should I be able to claim, like they have certain quotas for like black people to get into colleges or Asian people to get into colleges. They have certain affirmative action to equal the playing field. Should I get to tell people I feel black, therefore I'm black, and I get the benefits that are reserved for black people? If we decide to pay reparations to the black community for the horrors of slavery, like any first world country should do, like even Nazi Germany did with the Jews. If we decide to pay reparations, should I be able to claim reparations because I identify as black, as a descendant of someone who was involved in slavery, in being enslaved? That'd be preposterous, wouldn't it? But race is so much less biological than gender. So why do people get to choose their gender? Why are we hypocritical? Nobody says you get to choose your race. But yet we get to choose something which is way more biological, namely our gender. Because the LGBTQ community has gained some traction recently, and you got to keep up with the Joneses and be super like LGBTQ positive, and therefore anything they ask for, you got to like agree to. Just like with the BLM movement, if you don't like just immediately like jump on the bandwagon, like every time like the wind blows in a particular direction, you're behind the times, and you might as well be a slave owner. You guys following my critique? I have a rebuttal to my position. Remember? We've had these debates. You don't remember them? We find people born of one gender but living according to another gender all throughout human society for all time. Native Americans, India, China, the Middle East, as far back as Egypt, as far back as recorded history goes, there's always been men who lived as women and women who lived as men. It's this weird, funky thing that's happened in human society since recorded history. And so although it might be problematic from a biological viewpoint, we can't ignore that it's always been there. It's not some recent vogue thing which just happened 5 minutes ago. In the same way that human beings differ from animals in many ways. In many ways. Maybe we differ in this way as well. We also differ from animals in that we have full-fledged homosexuality in human society, whereas it does not exist in the animal kingdom. Full-fledged homosexuality does not exist in the animal kingdom. In nature. Homosexual behavior does, but those animals are always bisexual, heterosexual, and they still reproduce. But in human society, you find homosexual people who have never reported being interested in the opposite sex, ever under any circumstances. Another interesting thing about human society. In the same way we acknowledge that's just something about, we also cook our food, we also fly in airplanes, we also wear clothes, we also build houses. We do so much, we build skyscrapers. You know? We do all sorts of crazy stuff that animals don't do. And so, lo and behold, we have full-fledged homosexuals and we have transgendered people. And so although sex and gender are based in one's biology, human society fudges those lines a little bit and has forever. As far back as we can report. Domesticated sheep, 10% domesticated sheep are purely homosexual. However, they're domesticated. And so they're not in nature anymore. You follow? Tons of homosexual behavior in nature, but not pure. But it's there in human society. And so we have to acknowledge that gender gets a little fuzzy in human society and has for a long time. Therefore, maybe there's some allowance for people to choose their pronouns. And that's the best argument I've been able to come up with for why we should let people choose their pronouns. I have an even easier argument for why people should be able to choose their pronouns, and that's that people just tell me what they want me to call me. You know? Like if you're like, hey, what's your birth name? Chris, right? Hey, Christopher is his given name, but somehow or other I've always known you as Ian. I don't even know why. We know each other 20 years.
It's my middle name.
I've known Ian as Ian for 20 years, since he was like 17. How old are you?
37.
I've known him since he was 17. I've called you Ian since Dad met you. I know your given name is Chris. Your legal name is Chris. Christopher. I've never asked you why. I told me to call you Ian. That's what I've been calling him for 20 years. And so why not just let people choose their pronoun? What's the big deal? Let's sweat it off your back. Now, when you want to get into like them and theirs, and you want to go gender neutral, that gets a little rougher for me because sometimes it becomes grammatically incorrect. Using a plural pronoun like them sometimes becomes problematic. Even the Chicago Manual of Style in 2017, kind of the basic copyrighted book on the planet, acknowledges that gender neutral language has its limitations because sometimes it becomes obfuscating and problematic. I don't feel like I have to refer to you in the plural all the time. It's uncomfortable for me. It's not just calling you by a different name, but I have to actually restructure the way I think about language. I'm not so into it. Maybe if you ask nicely and I'm in a good mood, I might do it. Otherwise, I'm not willing to let somebody Latinx me. I'm not willing. You know what Latinx is? Raise your hand if you know what Latinx is. You don't know what Latinx is? Why didn't you raise your hand? You know what Latinx is? Raise your hand if you know what Latinx is. Just the two Latinx people in the room. Nobody else. Most languages are gendered. You're Latino or you're Latina. Almost every word in Spanish and many languages, all Romance languages and many other languages in the world are gendered. Sanskrit and all of its derivatives, including Hindi. The languages of billions of people in the world are gendered, which means if you want to say somebody's handsome and they're a handsome man, you'd say they are guapo. But if they're a handsome woman, you would say they're guapa. You understand? The whole language is gendered. And there's people who argue you should redo the entire language. Therefore, you're not Latino or Latina, you're Latin X, and it just includes everybody. I'm not buying it. I'm not going to rewrite my whole language because the gender police have decided to rewrite the language of every culture in the world. What's wrong with being gendered? What's wrong with, if you find it offensive? Well, I find it offensive not to be able to follow biology. So which one of us wins? I don't know, I got biology on my side. So that would seem to get, I got biology and history on my side. Is there anything inherently abusive about the language? There isn't. So why do people just get to change everything? Because they get snowflakey about it. You follow my line of argument? Here's why. There is no feminine word for doctor in Spanish. If you're a female doctor, you're called doctor, which is a male word, el doctor. And if you're a male doctor, you're called el doctor. There is no la doctora. Many words are only masculine. And it ends up making women feel like those words don't work for them. Gender-neutral language, they and them, is attested to going back over 5 centuries. You find it in the works of Shakespeare, in English. They tried tite and tem in like the 1800s, early 1900s. I think it was in like the 1930s they came up with that. They've been trying to come up with gender-neutral pronouns in the singular. None of them called on. So you're left with they and them, which makes you sound plural, even though you're an individual. But they've been trying to come up with this for a long time, and in fact, for an undesignated male or female, they were using plural gender-neutral pronouns in English 500-700 years ago. And when you say chairman, it makes you think that it's like always going to be a guy. And so to try as much as possible to come up with gender-neutral language makes women feel more included in society. It makes them feel more a part of society. It makes them feel less left out. And so when possible, within reason, we should try to use gender-neutral language, unless it becomes overly laborious or obfuscated. There's nothing inherently oppressive about using gendered language, though. So we should not see it as a fault. Even the word patriarchy somehow is seen as like an abusive, male-dominated culture, but that's ridiculous. My father passed on to me many values that his father passed on to him that helped me, that are based on my biology being different from that of a woman. You follow? What's wrong with that? What's wrong with having my father pass on certain things to me and my mother pass on certain things to me? What's wrong with having a matriarchal and a patriarchal culture? Why is that synonymous with abusive? It's like really lame that the feminist movement latched onto this term patriarchy and made it synonymous with evil, abusive culture. Because there's nothing inherently wrong with having something passed on from your father. There's nothing inherently wrong with gender roles. The third wave of feminism proved this because women said, hey, you know what? I don't want a white, lesbian, older woman with a shaved head telling me what it means to be empowered. I can be a stay-at-home mom. I can have lipstick feminism and really celebrate my sexuality, wear high heels and lipstick, and be very, very feminine. Be black feminist. I can be empowered and just live at home as a housewife and have that be my empowerment. Because I choose that and I want that and I like that. Who are you to tell me I have to dress like a man and act like a man or to be empowered? That's oppressive from you. Trying to define what it means to be a woman for me. That's the third wave of feminism being popular in the late 80s, early 90s. So, I like gender-neutral language as much as possible. The American Philosophical Society started adopting it as early as 1985 because you start to feel like it doesn't include you. And women here, it just it's like the chairman of the board, or it's the doctor, and these are all men, and you don't see yourself in it. And so we should try to use as much as possible within reason, but you shouldn't have to rewrite everything and assume that anytime you use any kind of gendered language, you're automatically being oppressive. At the time when Prabhupada wrote the Gita, it was before this gender-neutral language movement started with this wonderful book written by a couple of ladies co-authored the book. I think they were married. They were definitely life partners. I don't know if they ever got married or not. Very, very nice ladies, very thoughtful. They wrote elaborately, in a very sophisticated way, about gender-neutral language all through the 70s. That's where this whole movement came from. It's taken about 45 years for it to really gain traction, but it came from their writings. Almost everything we know came from their writings. It's incredible how much research they did over such a period of time. Prabhupada's book was written before that. And so even feminist writings used to say, when they were talking about an unknown, ungendered individual that you didn't know their gender, they would speak in the masculine. It's just the way everybody in the world wrote. And so when you're reading a book by an author who's passed away, you're not allowed to edit their works and change them. It's considered to be poor form, so we don't edit Prabhupada's voice. But he was speaking the same voice that was used by feminist authors in the 70s before they changed the language over. We don't look back at them and think that they were racist or idiotic, and it's nowhere near the same as slavery. It's way more innocuous. And we got the support of biology on our side. And so the Gita was a gendered language, and it assumed the male when it was undesignated, and therefore it would use the male, but it would intend male or female. Therefore, a woman would read this text and say, don't be too attached to your husband or your daughters or your house. And so although the male was stated, that's common. We do need to update it, but that was the standard for the grammar in which it was written. We don't change a text after somebody's passed away, and it's not nearly the same thing as slavery, and therefore it's not the same thing. That's what you missed. You follow? That's my argument. Yeah, I know. I ran out of time. You crushed me. It's okay. Did you guys follow all this? That's my thought on Latinx and gender-neutral pronouns and getting to choose your gender and getting to choose your race and all things gender politics and LGBTQ and biology versus human society and what I think is reasonable and what I think isn't, and arguments from both sides and how I go through it all. Anybody grossly offended by anything I've said? Fantastic. Here's what I want to look at. In his commentary on this verse, Prabhupada makes a nice point. He says, oh my God, I'm getting old. It's such a good vision, man. A lifetime of studying has caught up with me. As for detachment from children, wife, and home, it's not meant that one should have no feeling for these. Prabhupada actually meant to use the neutral. One should have no feeling for these. They are natural objects of affection. But when they are not favorable for spiritual progress, then one should not be attached to them. As for detachment from children, wife, and home, it's not meant that one should have no feeling for these. They are natural objects of affection, but when they're not favorable for spiritual progress, then one should not be attached to them. That's Prabhupada attempting to explain what all you guys were vexed by. We don't have much time left because I got too caught up on the intro. You guys hung me up a little bit. I'm going to go fast. If you spaced out for most of class, please pay attention now. Sometimes we use the word codependent. Codependent is from Alcoholics Anonymous. It was used to refer to the person who was in a relationship with the alcoholic. The alcoholic was dependent on alcohol, the codependent was dependent on that person, and therefore they were also involved in alcoholism. The term's evolved over the last 80 years since it originated. Now it means somebody who is in a relationship with a narcissistic person, and that person is the codependent, and the narcissist has an abusive relationship with the codependent. They run that person's behavior, and that person gives up their sense of self and becomes dependent on the praise or flattery of the narcissist, and then when they get rejected, they lose themselves and fall into a deep depression. That's how the term is used nowadays. It's not used in actual psychological literature. It's a popular term, which is used by non-specialists. You follow? There's a term, self-abandoning behavior, that's used by therapists. But the term does not come up in the literature, in the DSM. It just comes up in like self-help books written by non-specialists. So, here's my thoughts. It is simply not possible to love somebody and not be attached to them. It's not possible to be in a relationship with somebody and not depend on them. If that person betrays that trust, it is not possible to not be hurt by it. You'd have to be an automaton, and we're not into being automatons. What you can do, however, and this is what Prabhupada's alluding to in his purport, is you can have a part of yourself that's not up for grabs. You can have your values, your morals, a spiritual practice, a tribe, a community, and those things aren't up for grabs. And if your relationship with somebody requires you to give that up, you don't do it. That's why it's called self-abandoning behavior. You give up what makes you you for that other person. Don't do that. You can compromise. You can be a couple. You can be a part of a group. You can be a part of a union with somebody. They can affect you. You can affect them. That's the most natural thing in the world. But if you want to have a serious relationship with somebody, you have to know who you are. And you have to know what's not up for grabs. And when push comes to shove and somebody guts you, or you get in a relationship with the wrong person, or it goes south and they end up being narcissistic, or whatever ends up happening, if you haven't connected with who you really are, then you're left with the rug pulled out from under you and you don't know which end is up. If you have connected with who you are, you can anchor yourself to that, you can ride out anything, and you can thrive in any situation. You can go through losses and betrayals and pain and grow from those experiences, become a better version of yourself because you know who you are. You know what's not up for grabs. So what the Gita is talking about is an actual applied level of detachment. It's not just a statement, don't be attached, which then leads you to this impossibility. But do I never get married? How am I supposed to provide for my family? Feel motivated to do so? It seems like I have to be an automaton or a robot. All those are natural questions. With Prabhupada's really powerful notations on the subject and explicating it like I have, you can appreciate the value in these statements. And you can have a bigger yes in your life, which allows you to let go of things when you no longer become productive. It doesn't mean they won't hurt. It doesn't mean you won't be depressed. It doesn't mean it won't be hard. That's natural. And if you don't feel that way, there's something wrong with you. There's situational depression, where anybody who found themselves in your situation would be depressed. They don't prescribe medication for that. You just ride it out. Time, space, introspection, guidance, those things help you through it. And so once we troubleshoot the verse for its gendered language, which we did, once we understand the concept of duality in a general sense, we can then look at this verse dispassionately, and problems come up with the verse that you guys noted. And then we look at Prabhupada's commentary on the verse, and I've tried to explain Prabhupada's commentary in a little bit more detail. And there's a powerful message here. You go through life, love people, make partnerships, depend on people, lean on people. It's fantastic. You know that song? You might have a problem. I might have a problem that you'd understand. We all need somebody to lean on. You know that song? Lean on me when you're not strong. You know that song? That's like my wife and my song. It's been our song since we were kids. 22, 23 years it's been our song. You didn't know that, right? I never said that before in the class. That's kind of our song. Every comes on the radio, we hold hands and we all goo goo gaga gaga. And so, and we've been hearing that song magically at various points in our life since we were kids. So, life is beautiful because of other people, and loving other people, and having relationships with other people, and depending on them, getting more done synergistically than you do on your own. And that means that you become vulnerable. Because love requires vulnerability. It's a gift you give a person. People don't earn their love. You give it to them. There's always an element of giving and generosity involved in love. Otherwise, it's just a transaction. It's not really love. Love carries with it free will and vulnerability by its very construct. And that means that things will happen and you'll get hurt and you'll get sad. And you shouldn't expect to feel all elated all the time. Otherwise, there's something wrong with you. You're like lobotomized or something like that. What you can do is have a massive, huge, colossal yes that you've cultivated in your life of inviolable truths that you've discovered, that you've realized they're deep and they're your core. And they don't change for anybody. And when push comes to shove, you anchor yourself to those and you ride out any storm of life, including birth, death, old age, and disease, and everything in between. That was the point I wanted to make. And I think we're out of time. If you're on IGTV, thank you very much for tolerating me. A little feisty today. Hare Krishna, thank you very much. If you're on Zoom or Facebook, you can hang out for a second. and you can give me some feedback.